My mother-in-law orchestrated a vicious lie about me during Thanksgiving dinner when she thought no one would believe me. "He's been secretly gambling away your savings," she told my wife, with tears in her eyes. The entire family turned against me in an instant. 3 days later, I discovered our home security cameras had captured every scheming conversation she'd had with my brother-in-law to frame me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches, you make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Nathan Cooper, 35 years old, financial advisor based in Portland, Oregon. I've built my career on integrity and trust, mutual funds, retirement planning, ethical investing, the kind of work that requires absolute honesty. And I live by that code, both professionally and personally. But to my mother-in-law, Vivian Richardson, what I did for a living made me the perfect scapegoat for her own financial misdeeds. She never trusted money men, as she called us, despite the comfortable retirement portfolio I'd helped her build over the 7 years I'd been married to her daughter, Rebecca. Every family gathering at their sprawling colonial in Lake Oswego was an exercise in restraint. Vivian would interrogate me about market fluctuations while her husband, Howard, nodded along, barely concealing his disinterest. Rebecca would squeeze my hand under the table, a silent plea for patience. I'd been working on a major client presentation all week, analyzing sustainable investment options for a local credit union's pension fund. The pressure was immense. This contract could elevate our boutique firm to the next level. I was exhausted, but Rebecca insisted we couldn't miss her mother's elaborate Thanksgiving dinner. "Just one afternoon," she promised. "Dad really wants to see you." I should have listened to that knot in my stomach when Vivian cornered me in the kitchen, the way her eyes darted around before she whispered, "Nathan, we need to talk about Rebecca's inheritance soon." The slight tremor in her hand as she clutched her third glass of Chardonnay. Something wasn't right. I just didn't know how wrong it was about to get. Rebecca and I met 8 years ago at a charity fundraiser, where I was volunteering as a financial literacy coach for underprivileged teens. She was coordinating the event, a passionate non-profit director whose genuine desire to make a difference captivated me immediately. We connected over spreadsheets and budget forecasts, finding unexpected romance in our shared love of helping others secure their futures. Her family was another story. From our first meeting, Howard seemed pleasant enough, a retired engineer who spent most of his time on golf courses and woodworking projects. But Vivian made it clear she had expected someone different for her daughter, someone with family connections, old money, a name that appeared in local society pages, someone exactly like Thomas Whitfield, Rebecca's ex-boyfriend from a banking dynasty family. "Nathan certainly knows his numbers," she'd say to her friends at our engagement party with the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let's hope he's as good with family as he is with other people's money." For years, I tried to win her over. I'd answer her invasive financial questions patiently, help manage her investment portfolio free of charge, even endure her not-so-subtle comparisons to Thomas and his thriving private banking practice, and nothing changed her perception that I was somehow unworthy of her daughter or her family's trust. Last summer, I overheard Vivian on the phone during a family barbecue. "Rebecca could have married into the Whitfield family, you know. Board seat at First Heritage Bank, guaranteed. Instead, she chose the numbers guy from that tiny firm." The way she paused before "tiny" made it sound like a terminal disease. Howard was more direct when Rebecca and I announced we were buying our first home. He pulled me aside during the housewarming party. "Son, I've set aside some funds for Rebecca's future. Might be best if they remain in my name for now. Nothing personal, just good financial sense until you're more established." I never told Rebecca about these conversations. She adored her father and maintained hope that her mother would eventually warm to me. I didn't want to force her to choose sides, so I smiled, shook Howard's hand firmly at every visit, complimented Vivian's immaculate home, and kept my thoughts to myself. But there were signs I should have taken more seriously. The way Vivian would suddenly change financial discussions when I entered the room, how she'd schedule family-only lunches with Rebecca to discuss women's matters. The time she suggested. Rebecca might want to keep a separate bank account just in case, while looking directly at me. I ignored it all, thinking time would eventually bring acceptance. I was wrong. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I returned from a client meeting with dark circles under my eyes and a portfolio full of projections that needed refining before Monday's presentation. I was running on caffeine and determination, but showered, put on a sweater that Vivian had once complimented, and drove us to Lake Oswego for the annual Richardson Thanksgiving extravaganza. The sprawling house was already filled with family when we arrived. Rebecca's brother Michael and his wife Stephanie, their twin teenagers glued to their phones, Howard's sister Eleanor and her husband, and a few neighbors who had become honorary family members over the years. The atmosphere was festive, the house smelling of roasting turkey and Vivian's famous sage stuffing. Dinner started normally. Howard carved the turkey with surgical precision. Michael boasted about his recent promotion. Vivian orchestrated the passing of dishes with her usual control. I nursed a single glass of wine and made pleasant conversation with Eleanor about her recent trip to Portugal. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After the pumpkin pie had been served and the compliments to the chef properly paid, Vivian tapped her glass for attention. Before we moved to the living room for coffee, I wanted to share some wonderful news. Howard and I have decided to help Michael and Stephanie expand their business into the Portland market. We're so proud of what they've built, and we know this investment will secure our family's legacy. Rebecca beamed at her brother. That's amazing. The children's clothing boutique will be perfect for the Pearl District. We think so too, honey, Vivian replied, her voice softening as it always did when addressing her daughter. Actually, we've been doing quite a bit of financial restructuring lately, getting our affairs in order. Her eyes flicked to me briefly. Howard's retirement accounts, my inheritance from my parents, various investments. I felt a slight tension in the air, but couldn't place why. Howard suddenly became very interested in crumbling a piece of dinner roll between his fingers. Speaking of investments, Vivian continued, her voice taking on a concerned tone. Rebecca, darling, I've been meaning to talk to you privately, but perhaps it's best if we clear the air as a family. Rebecca looked confused. What is it, Mom? Vivian reached across the table to take her daughter's hand, her expression transforming into one of practiced concern. Howard and I received some troubling information last week about Nathan. The dining room fell silent. Every eye turned to me. What kind of information? Rebecca asked, her voice small. Financial irregularities, Vivian said gravely. Gambling, debts, significant ones. I nearly choked on my water. Excuse me? Vivian didn't look at me, keeping her focus on Rebecca. We have it on good authority that Nathan has been frequenting online gambling sites, poker, sports betting. Apparently, he's developed quite a problem over the past year. That's absolutely false, I said firmly, looking around the table at the shocked expressions. I don't gamble, not even lottery tickets. Michael cleared his throat. Vivian, maybe this isn't the right time. When is the right time to tell my daughter that her husband is gambling away their savings? Vivian's voice rose dramatically. That the money they've been saving for a family might already be gone. Rebecca turned to me, her face pale. Nathan? This is completely untrue, I said, reaching for her hand. She pulled away slightly. That small movement felt like a physical blow. Howard finally spoke up. We have evidence, son. Bank statements, withdrawals to known gambling payment processors, credit card charges at casinos in Tacoma when you told Rebecca you were at client meetings. My mind raced. I hadn't been to Tacoma in years. I'd never used a gambling site in my life. My work literally involved helping people make responsible financial decisions. "Whatever you think you have is fabricated or misunderstood," I said, struggling to keep my voice calm. "Rebecca, you have access to all our accounts. You know I don't gamble." "Actually," Vivian interjected, "we believe he's been using accounts you don't know about, honey. A financial advisor would know how to hide these things." The accusation hung in the air, poisoning the atmosphere. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears as she looked at me, doubt clearly forming. "May I see this supposed evidence?" I asked Howard directly. He glanced at Vivian, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "I have copies in my study, after dessert perhaps." The remainder of the meal was excruciating. Conversation faltered and died. The teenagers, sensing the tension, asked to be excused. Eleanor and her husband made awkward attempts at changing the subject. Through it all, Rebecca sat silent beside me, a physical and emotional chasm growing between us with each passing minute. After dinner, I followed Howard to his study, aware of Rebecca trailing behind us. Michael appeared in the doorway as Howard pulled a folder from his desk drawer. "These were provided to us by a concerned party," Howard said, sounding more uncomfortable now that we were away from Vivian's orchestrating presence. He handed me several papers, what appeared to be bank statements showing large cash withdrawals, screenshots of online poker sites with a username similar to one I used for some accounts, credit card statements with charges to casinos and sports betting platforms. I studied them carefully, my professional training kicking in. "These are fake," I said after a moment. "Good fakes, but fake nonetheless. The routing number on this bank statement is incorrect for Wells Fargo. The font is slightly off on these credit card statements, and I've never used this email address associated with the gambling accounts." Rebecca looked over my shoulder. "Dad, where did you get these?" Howard shifted uncomfortably. "An investigator Vivian hired. She was concerned about some comments Nathan made at the 4th of July barbecue about investment risks. She wanted to make sure you were protected." "An investigator?" Rebecca's voice rose in disbelief. "Mom hired someone to investigate my husband. She was trying to protect you," Michael said from the doorway. "We all were. These gambling problems can spiral quickly. The investigator has an excellent reputation." I turned to Michael, suddenly suspicious of his defensive tone. "How would you know about the investigator's reputation?" Before he could answer, Vivian appeared behind him. "Because Michael recommended him, of course, after he noticed some concerning patterns in Nathan's behavior." The pieces clicked into place. "You've been building this case against me for months, haven't you? Both of you." I looked between Vivian and Michael. "We've been gathering evidence," Vivian corrected, her voice hard, "to protect Rebecca from your addiction and financial recklessness." Rebecca was shaking now. "I don't understand. Nathan, is any of this true?" The doubt in her voice cut deep. "No," I said firmly. "None of it. I would never jeopardize our future like that. You know me, Rebecca." "Do we really know anyone completely?" Vivian asked softly, playing the concerned mother perfectly. "Addictions change people, make them hide things, lie to those they love." Rebecca looked lost, torn between trusting her husband of 7 years and the family she'd known her entire life. "I need some air," she whispered, pushing past everyone and out of the study. I moved to follow her, but Howard placed a restraining hand on my arm. "Give her space, son. This is a lot to process." The drive home that night was silent and painful. Rebecca stared out the passenger window while I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing for explanations, for ways to prove my innocence. When we arrived home, She went straight upstairs without a word. I stayed in the living room, too agitated to sleep, replaying the evening's events. Around 2 a.m., I remembered something that sent a surge of hope through me. Our home security system. 6 months earlier, after a break-in at a neighbor's house, we'd installed cameras throughout our property, including one in the home office where I sometimes worked weekends. If someone had accessed my computer or files to fabricate this evidence, perhaps the cameras had caught them. I spent the next 3 hours reviewing footage from the past 2 months. Nothing unusual appeared until I checked the recordings from 2 weeks earlier. A Sunday, when Rebecca and I had gone hiking at Silver Falls State Park. There on the screen were Michael and Vivian, entering our house using the spare key we kept in the lockbox for emergencies. My heart pounded as I watched them go directly to my home office. Michael sat at my computer while Vivian kept watch. They spent nearly 2 hours there, taking photos of documents, searching through files, and downloading information from my computer. At one point, Michael clearly photographed financial statements from my desk drawer. Later footage showed them, returning 3 days later when we were at a dinner with friends, this time with a third person, carrying what looked like computer equipment. I downloaded all the footage to a secure drive, my hands shaking with a mixture of relief and anger. I had proof of their deception, their invasion of our home, but the larger question remained why. Why would Rebecca's mother and brother go to such lengths to discredit me? The answer came from an unexpected source the next morning. While Rebecca was in the shower, still barely speaking to me, I received a text from Stephanie, Michael's wife. "We need to talk. Not at home. The coffee shop on Madison at 10. I arrived early, choosing a quiet corner table. Stephanie slipped in looking nervous, her usual polished appearance slightly disheveled. "I can't stay long," she said immediately. "Michael thinks I'm at Pilates." "What's going on, Stephanie? Why would Michael and Vivian break into our house and fabricate evidence that I'm gambling?" She glanced around before leaning forward. "Because they're desperate. Vivian has been secretly supporting Michael's business for years. It's not successful. It's a money pit. The expansion they announced yesterday? It's not happening unless they find a major cash infusion." I struggled to process this. "What does that have to do with me?" "Everything," Stephanie sighed. "Vivian's been borrowing against Howard's retirement funds without his knowledge to keep Michael afloat. Now Howard wants to make some withdrawals for a boat he's been dreaming about, and the money isn't there. They need a scapegoat, and you're perfect, the financial advisor in the family. If they can convince Rebecca you've been gambling and mismanaging money, they can potentially access your joint savings to help her through the crisis." "That's insane," I whispered, "and illegal." "It's also Vivian," Stephanie said bitterly. "She's been controlling and manipulating this family for decades. I've watched her do it to Michael for years. He's so desperate for her approval that he'll do anything she asks." "Why are you telling me this?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Because Rebecca is the only decent one in that family, and because I found out yesterday that they're planning to take this further, planting evidence in your office at work, making anonymous tips to your firm's compliance officer. They want to destroy your career, Nathan. They need Rebecca to leave you and come back to the family fold where they can control her money, her inheritance from Howard's mother, everything." I felt physically ill. "Does Howard know what they're doing?" "I don't think so. He's suspicious. But Vivian has been gaslighting him for years about his memory, his judgment. He relies on her for everything now." As Stephanie prepared to leave, she paused. "There's one more thing. The investigator they mentioned? He's not legitimate. He's Michael's gambling buddy from college. The irony would be funny if it weren't so twisted. Armed with this information and the security footage, I faced a difficult decision. Confronting Vivian and Michael directly might cause them to accelerate their plans against me. Going to Rebecca with only Stephanie's word against her mother and brother might not be enough to overcome a lifetime of trust. I needed more evidence. That evening, I approached Rebecca carefully as she sat on our back porch, staring vacantly into the garden. "I need to show you something," I said quietly, setting my laptop before her. "It's security footage from our house while we were hiking 2 weeks ago." She watched without speaking as the video showed her mother and brother searching our office. Her face paled. "This could be innocent," she whispered, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. Maybe there was an emergency, something they needed. "Rebecca, they photographed our financial statements. They downloaded files from my computer, and they came back again 3 days later with someone bringing additional equipment." Tears filled her eyes. "Why would they do this?" "I think they're trying to frame me," I said gently. "I believe your mother and Michael are in financial trouble, and they're setting me up to take the fall." "That's a serious accusation," she said, her voice hardening slightly. "This is my family you're talking about." "I know," I acknowledged. "And I wouldn't say it if I didn't have evidence beyond this video. But I need your help to get the full picture." "What do you want me to do?" she asked after a long silence. "Act normal. Express doubt about me to your mother. Tell her you're scared and confused. See what she says, what she advises. But where? This." I handed her a small voice recorder. "We need to know exactly what they're planning." Rebecca stared at the recorder for several heartbeats before slowly taking it. "If I do this and they're innocent, our relationship with my family will never recover. And if you don't and they're guilty, our marriage might not recover," I countered softly. The next day, Rebecca went to lunch with Vivian. I waited anxiously. At home, pacing our living room, alternating between fear that my wife wouldn't return and hope that the truth would finally emerge. When the front door finally opened, Rebecca's expression told me everything I needed to know before she even played the recording. Vivian's voice filled our living room, crystal clear. "Darling, you need to protect yourself immediately. Transfer your personal savings to an account in just your name. I've already spoken to Thomas Whitfield at First Heritage. He can help you set it up discreetly." Rebecca's voice shaking slightly. "But what if Nathan isn't gambling? What if this is all a misunderstanding?" "The evidence is clear," Vivian insisted. "Michael's investigator is certain. And honestly, we've been suspecting something like this for months. Haven't you noticed money missing from your joint accounts?" "Not really, no." "Well, addicts are clever, especially someone with Nathan's financial background. He knows how to hide these things." Rebecca again. "What should I do about our house, our future?" Vivian's voice turned soothing, maternal. "Move back home for a while. We'll hire the best divorce attorney in Portland. Between the gambling evidence and what we have on his computer, we can make sure you get everything. The house, his retirement accounts, everything." "What do you have on his computer?" Rebecca asked, her voice impressively steady. A slight pause. "Michael discovered some inappropriate communications with clients. Nothing illegal necessarily, but certainly unethical. Enough to threaten his professional standing if it came to light." "And how did Michael access Nathan's computer?" Rebecca pressed. Another pause, longer this time. "That doesn't matter, darling. What matters is protecting you." "It matters to me," Rebecca insisted, the sound of a chair scraping. "I think you're too emotional right now to think clearly. Let's talk tomorrow after you've had time to process everything." The recording ended. Rebecca looked at me, her face a storm of emotions. "There's more," she said quietly, reaching into her purse and pulling out a folded document. "I went to First Heritage Bank after lunch. Thomas was very interested to hear that I was considering opening an account. He already had paperwork started, in both my name and my mother's. Joint access. She was planning to control my money just like she apparently controls Dad's." I took her hands in mine. "I'm so sorry, Rebecca. This is a nightmare." She squeezed my fingers. There's one more thing we need to know. How far they're willing to go. The next evening found us at the Richardson home for an impromptu family dinner. Rebecca's suggestion, delivered with just the right amount of emotional fragility to make Vivian believe her plan was working. I played my part, appearing withdrawn and defensive. Michael watched me with barely concealed triumph. Howard merely looked confused and sad. During dessert, Rebecca excused herself to use the restroom. What no one knew was that she was actually placing small cameras in Vivian's study and the living room, the same model as our home security system, activated remotely. "Nathan and I have been talking," she announced upon returning, her voice trembling perfectly. "I'm going to stay here for a few days while we figure things out." Vivian immediately put her arm around Rebecca. "You can stay as long as you need, darling. Your old room is always ready for you." Michael nodded approvingly. "It's the right decision, Becca. You need family around you at a time like this." I looked appropriately devastated, which wasn't difficult given the circumstances. "Rebecca, please, we can work through this." "I need space," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I'll come by tomorrow to pack some things." As I drove home alone, part of our plan, I felt physically ill at the thought of what Rebecca might discover in that house tonight. But by morning, we would have the final pieces of evidence we needed. Sure enough, at 6 a.m., Rebecca called me, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Check your email, I'm coming home now." The footage she'd captured was damning. After I'd left, and Rebecca had gone to bed, Vivian, Howard, and Michael gathered in the study. Howard, looking increasingly distressed, finally confronted his wife. "Vivian, I checked with the bank yesterday. My retirement account is down over $200,000 from last year. You said it was market fluctuations, but that doesn't add up." Vivian's expression hardened. "This isn't the time, Howard. We need to focus on helping Rebecca." "No," Howard insisted with unexpected firmness. "I want answers. I spoke to our accountant. He mentioned loans against the house that I never approved. Withdrawals I never made." Michael intervened. "Dad, you're getting confused again. Remember how you mixed up those medication dates last month? Mom has been handling the finances because your memory isn't what it used to be." Howard looked uncertain. "But I specifically remember." "You remember what you want to remember," Vivian snapped. "Just like you conveniently forget how many times you've signed papers without reading them. This family would have fallen apart years ago if I hadn't taken control of our finances." "What have you done with our money, Vivian?" Howard asked directly. A tense silence followed before Michael spoke. "Mum has been helping me, Dad. The business had some cash flow issues. Nothing serious, but enough that we needed short-term loans. Short-term loans that have stretched to 3 years, Vivian added dismissively. But it's family money helping family, unlike that outsider Rebecca married who's been gambling away their savings." Howard looked confused again. "The gambling evidence. Where exactly did that come from?" Michael and Vivian exchanged glances. "The investigator provided it," Michael said smoothly. "And who is this investigator? Have we met him? Seen his credentials?" Howard pressed. Vivian's patience visibly snapped. "For God's sake, Howard, stop questioning everything. Nathan is a problem that needs to be removed. Once Rebecca divorces him and moves back home, we'll help her recover. Financially, she'll have access to her trust fund next year when she turns 35, and we can use that to stabilize everything." Howard's face registered shock. "You're planning to use Rebecca's inheritance from my mother to fix Michael's business problems? That money is hers, Vivian, not ours, not Michael's. It's all family money," Vivian insisted. "And family takes care of family. Rebecca will understand once Nathan is out of the picture." "And how exactly is that happening?" Howard asked, his voice growing stronger. These gambling accusations, they seem convenient, too convenient. Michael looked uncomfortable for the first time. Dad, you don't want to know the details. Trust us, it's better this way. What have you two done? Howard demanded. Vivian finally lost her composure completely. What we had to do. Michael's business is underwater. The house has 2 mortgages. Your retirement account is nearly depleted. We needed a solution, and Nathan provided the perfect opportunity. A financial advisor with access to accounts and investments. Who better to blame for missing money? The color drained from Howard's face. You've been stealing from our accounts, and you're framing our daughter's husband to cover it up? Have you lost your mind, Vivian? I've been trying to save this. Family, Vivian shouted. Everything I've done has been to protect what we've built. The footage continued, showing Howard's growing horror as the full extent of Vivian and Michael's deception unfolded. By the time Rebecca arrived home that morning, we had everything we needed. What do we do now? She asked, her voice hollow, as she curled against me on our couch. We have options, I said carefully. We could go to the police. What they've done includes breaking and entering, invasion of privacy, potential financial fraud, defamation. They're still my family, Rebecca whispered. I nodded, understanding the impossible position she was in. Then perhaps a family reckoning first, on our terms. That afternoon, we invited the entire Richardson family to our home. Howard, Vivian, Michael, Stephanie, and Eleanor. We set up the living room with our large TV screen prominently displayed but dark for now. When everyone had arrived, looking confused by the urgent summons, Rebecca stood beside me, our hands firmly clasped together. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice steady. Nathan and I have discovered something disturbing that affects our entire family, and we felt it was important to address it together. Rebecca, if this is about the gambling situation, Vivian started. It is, Rebecca interrupted, but not in the way you think. She nodded to me, and I activated the screen, starting with the footage of Michael and Vivian breaking into our home office. For the next 40 minutes, we played selected clips from our evidence, the security footage, the recording of Vivian counseling Rebecca to drain our accounts, and finally, the devastating conversation from the previous night where Vivian and Michael's plan was fully exposed. The room was dead silent when the screen finally went dark. Howard sat with his head in his hands. Eleanor looked between her brother and sister-in-law with shock. Stephanie stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Michael was the first to speak. You recorded us illegally. That wouldn't stand up in court. Oregon is a one-party consent state for audio recording, I said calmly, and our home security footage captured you breaking in. That's perfectly admissible. But we're not in court, Michael. We're in our living room, giving you a chance to come clean before this goes further. Vivian had turned pale but remained defiant. You've edited these recordings, taken things out of context. Rebecca shook her head sadly. Mom, stop. It's over. We have the unedited versions and you know it. We know everything. About Michael's failing business, about the money you've been taking from Dad's accounts, about your plans to access my trust fund. We even know about the falsified evidence against Nathan. Howard finally looked up. I want the truth, Vivian. All of it. Now. What followed was painful but necessary. The full confession of years of financial manipulation, of Vivian's increasing desperation as Michael's business floundered and debts mounted, of their scheme to remove me from the family by any means necessary. When the confessions finally wound down, Rebecca addressed her family. Here's what happens next. Dad, you'll need to meet with a financial advisor, not Nathan, to avoid any conflict of interest, to understand exactly what's left of your retirement and how to protect it. Michael, your business needs proper accounting and transparency. If it can't survive without constant bailouts, perhaps it shouldn't survive at all. She turned to her mother. "Mom, you need help. This manipulative behavior has gone beyond controlling, into something destructive. I'm not equipped to diagnose you, but I strongly suggest therapy." Vivian bristled. "Don't be dramatic, Rebecca. I was trying to protect this family." "No," Rebecca said firmly. "You were trying to control this family, and you were willing to destroy my marriage and Nathan's reputation to maintain that control." She took a deep breath. "Nathan and I have discussed this at length, and we've decided not to pursue criminal charges for Dad's sake and for the sake of whatever relationship we might be able to salvage from this. But things will change, starting today." The terms Rebecca outlined were non-negotiable: complete financial transparency for all family accounts, professional help for both the business and for Vivian's controlling behavior, and most importantly, respect for the boundaries of our marriage and our independent financial decisions. Howard, looking suddenly older but somehow unburdened, agreed immediately. Michael, after a long look from Stephanie, nodded reluctantly. Vivian remained silent, but her lack of objection was acquiescence enough for now. As the family filed out, subdued and shaken, Howard lingered behind. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I should have seen what was happening, should have stopped it." "It's not your fault, Howard," I said genuinely. "Manipulation works by making you doubt yourself." "Still," he sighed, "I let it happen. To my family, to you. That's on me." He extended his hand. "I hope someday you can forgive an old man's weakness." I shook his hand firmly. "We'll work on rebuilding, all of us, together." 3 months passed. Howard filed for separation from Vivian and moved into Eleanor's guest house while beginning the process of reclaiming his financial independence. Michael's business underwent a professional audit, revealing even greater losses than suspected. He and Stephanie made the difficult decision to close the retail stores and pivot to an online-only model with strict financial controls. Vivian, after initial resistance, began seeing a therapist specializing in controlling behaviors. Progress was slow and sometimes painful, but it was progress nonetheless. Our family dinners became less frequent, but more genuine, with healthier boundaries and more honest communication. Rebecca and I renewed our commitment to each other, stronger for having weathered this storm together. The trust between us, momentarily shaken by Vivian's manipulations, now stood on firmer ground than ever before. One evening, as we sat on our back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Rebecca turned to me. "Do you think they'll ever truly change, my mother and Michael?" I considered the question carefully. "I think Howard has already changed. Found his voice again after years of being silenced. Michael might, with time and distance from your mother's influence. As for Vivian," I sighed, "that's harder to say. Some people hold on to control because they fear what they'd be without it." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "I used to think family meant loyalty above all else, even truth. Now I understand that real family loyalty means holding each other accountable, not enabling each other's worst impulses." As darkness settled around us, I realized something I hadn't fully articulated. Before, we hadn't won by playing Vivian's game of manipulation and deception. We'd won by refusing to play it at all. We'd stood our ground, protected what mattered, and insisted on truth rather than convenient lies. In the end, that was the most satisfying vindication. Not the exposure of Vivian's schemes or Michael's complicity, but the preservation of our integrity through the darkest moments. We had faced the storm and emerged not just intact but stronger, wiser, and more deeply committed to living honestly, even when truth came at a painful cost. "Whatever happens with your family," I said, taking Rebecca's hand in mine, "we'll face it together on our terms, not theirs." She smiled, squeezing my fingers gently. Our terms. I like the sound of that. The days following that disastrous Thanksgiving were some of the most difficult of my marriage. Rebecca moved between moments of fierce loyalty and nagging doubt, often in the same hour. We'd built 7 years of trust, but her family had shaped her entire life. Every time her phone rang with her mother's number, I could see the internal struggle play across her face. "I just need to understand why they would do this," she said one evening, curled on the opposite end of our couch, the physical distance between us mirroring the emotional chasm Vivian had engineered. "If Mom and Michael really are lying, there has to be a reason beyond just not liking you." I nodded, careful to keep my frustration in check. "That's exactly what we need to find out." "But Rebecca, consider what Stephanie told me. If they're in serious financial trouble—" "But that doesn't make sense either," she interrupted. "Dad's retirement was solid. They live comfortably, not extravagantly. Michael's business has always seemed successful. Why would they suddenly be desperate for money?" An idea formed as she spoke. What if it hasn't been sudden? What if this has been building for years? Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "What are you thinking?" "I think we need more information. Not just about what they're doing now, but what they've been doing for years. If your mother has been manipulating money and people for a long time, there might be a pattern we could uncover." How would we even begin to investigate that? I considered our options carefully. Direct confrontation had already failed. Vivian was too skilled at deflection. Michael too committed to supporting her narrative. We needed evidence they couldn't dismiss or explain away. "Let's start by checking public records," I suggested. "Property assessments, business filings, tax liens, anything that might show financial distress. It's all public information." Rebecca hesitated. "This feels like we're spying on my family." "We're looking up public information," I corrected gently. "Information anyone could access. Your family invaded our home, planted false evidence, and tried to destroy our marriage. All we're doing is seeking the truth." That night we began our research. Rebecca accessed the county property records, while I focused on business filings for Michael's boutique children's clothing company, Little Adventurers. Around midnight, Rebecca's sharp intake of breath caught my attention. "Nathan, the lake. House has a second mortgage and a third, and there's a lien against it from the IRS. I moved to look over her shoulder at the screen. The family vacation property on Lake Oswego, Vivian's pride and joy, inherited from her parents, was leveraged to the hilt. Based on the filing dates, the financial troubles had started at least 5 years earlier. And look at this, she continued, clicking through more documents. Their primary residence has been refinanced 3 times in the last 4 years. And, oh my God, Dad's name isn't even on the most recent mortgage, just Mom's. Meanwhile, my research into Little Adventurers revealed equally troubling patterns. The company had been incorporated 8 years earlier with significant initial capital, presumably from Howard and Vivian. But despite Vivian's constant bragging about its success, the business had filed for extensions on tax payments for 3 consecutive years. There were multiple UCC filings showing the company's inventory and equipment were collateralized for loans. "Michael's business is underwater," I concluded, showing Rebecca the documents. "These aren't the records of a thriving retail operation. They're staying afloat through continuous cash infusions and loans." Rebecca pressed her fingers to her temples. "But where is all this money going? Even with a struggling business, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars." We continued digging, expanding our search to include court records. Around 2 a.m., I found something that made my blood run cold. "Rebecca, did you know Michael has a gambling problem?" She looked up sharply. "What? No, that's impossible." I turned my laptop toward her, showing a civil judgment from 3 years earlier. A casino in Tacoma had successfully sued Michael for $175,000 in unpaid markers. "Tacoma," Rebecca whispered. "The same place they accused you of gambling." "Classic projection," I said quietly. "They're accusing me of exactly what Michael has been doing." The pieces were starting to fit together, but we still lacked the complete picture. The next morning, I called in a favor from a college friend who now worked as a forensic accountant. "I need to understand how money might be moving between these entities," I explained, sharing our findings. "Can you help us visualize the patterns?" Derek agreed to look at the public records we'd gathered. 2 days later, he sent us a financial flowchart that confirmed our suspicions. Money had been systematically moving from Howard's retirement accounts into Vivian's personal accounts, then to Michael's business, and from there. Large sums simply disappeared, most likely to cover gambling debts. "This is a classic family financial fraud scenario," Derek noted in his analysis. "The business appears to be functioning primarily as a money laundering operation, disguising withdrawals from retirement accounts and home equity as business investments." Rebecca sat in stunned silence after reading his assessment. "My brother is a gambling addict, and my mother has been covering for him by stealing from my father for years," she finally said, her voice hollow. "And now they're trying to frame you when they need a bigger source of cash." "The timing makes sense," I agreed. "Your trust fund becomes accessible on your 35th birthday in a few months. That's a significant amount of money that could solve their immediate financial problems. If I were divorced and vulnerable, they could manipulate me into helping the family, just like they've manipulated Dad." The realization seemed to physically pain her. They were willing to destroy my marriage to access my inheritance. While the public records and financial analysis gave us a clearer picture of why Vivian and Michael had targeted me, we still needed more concrete evidence of their deliberate fabrication of gambling evidence against me. The security footage showed them in our home office, but not specifically what they were doing on my computer. That's when Rebecca remembered something important. "Nathan, your work laptop backs up automatically to the cloud, doesn't it? With version history?" I sat up straighter. "Yes, every document, every spreadsheet, they all have revision histories." We spent the next day reviewing the cloud backup. Logs for my work computer. Sure enough, during the times Michael and Vivian had been in our home, someone had accessed my financial planning templates and client spreadsheets. More importantly, they had created new documents that were designed to look like my work, but contained fictitious gambling transactions disguised as investment activities. "They created fake client files," I said, showing Rebecca the documents that had been created and then deleted but remained in the cloud history. "Look at these formulas. They're designed to hide money moving to these accounts, which I'm guessing are shell accounts they created to make it look like I was diverting funds." Rebecca studied the spreadsheets, her background in non-profit financial management helping her understand the implications. "It's sophisticated. They must have had help setting this up." "The mysterious investigator Michael mentioned," I suggested. "Stephanie said he was actually Michael's gambling buddy from college. Probably someone with experience hiding money." Our investigation took an unexpected turn when Rebecca received a call from Eleanor, Howard's sister. "I need to talk to both of you," she said, her voice tense. "Not on the phone. Can I come over tonight?" Eleanor had always been the quiet observer in the Richardson family, present at gatherings but rarely involved in the family drama. That she was reaching out now suggested she might have important information. When she arrived, she seemed nervous, glancing around as if worried about being followed. "Howard called me yesterday," she began, once we were seated in our living room. "He's confused and upset. He went to make a withdrawal from his retirement account for a fishing boat he's been saving for, and the money wasn't there. Vivian told him it was just a temporary issue with the investment firm, but he doesn't believe her anymore. Did he say how much was missing? I asked carefully. Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. Almost all of it. Over $700,000. His entire retirement except for his pension. Rebecca gasped. Dad has no idea, does he, about any of this? I don't think so, Eleanor confirmed. He's always trusted Vivian with the finances, signed whatever she put in front of him. But lately, he's been noticing discrepancies. Bills he doesn't remember, accounts he didn't know existed. Has he confronted her? I asked. He's tried, but you know Vivian. She turns it around, makes him think his memory is failing, tells him he agreed to things he doesn't remember agreeing to. Eleanor looked genuinely distressed. I think she's been gaslighting him for years, Nathan, making him doubt his own mind so he won't question her about the money. This new information added another disturbing layer to the situation. Not only were Vivian and Michael trying to frame me and potentially access Rebecca's inheritance, but they had been psychologically manipulating Howard to cover their financial fraud. Eleanor hesitated before continuing. There's something else. Howard mentioned that Vivian has been pushing him to change his will, to put Michael in charge of all financial decisions if anything happens to her. He's resisting, but she's relentless. The implications were chilling. If Howard died or became incapacitated, Michael, with his gambling addiction and financial recklessness, would control all family assets. Rebecca's inheritance would be completely vulnerable. We need to help Dad, Rebecca said after Eleanor left. Even if we can protect ourselves, he's still in danger. I agreed, but we had to be strategic. Direct accusations against Vivian would likely backfire, causing Howard to defend his wife of 40 years out of loyalty and habit. We needed irrefutable evidence that even he couldn't deny. Our opportunity came unexpectedly. The following weekend, Howard called Rebecca, asking if she would help him organize his woodworking shop. Your mother's at her garden club all day, he explained. I could use the company. While Rebecca kept Howard occupied in the garage, I took the risk of searching Vivian's home office. I didn't have to look far. In the bottom drawer of her desk, beneath a false bottom I discovered by accident, was a folder containing documents that confirmed our worst suspicions. Forged authorizations for retirement account withdrawals bearing crude imitations of Howard's signature. Account statements for offshore accounts in Vivian's maiden name, receipts for cash transfers to casinos in Vivian's handwriting, with notes like Michael final payment that were subsequently crossed out and replaced with new dates. Most damning of all was a recent letter from their family attorney outlining the changes Vivian wanted to make to Howard's will. Changes that would effectively disinherit Rebecca if she remained married to me. The attorney advised against such language, noting it could be contested, but suggested alternatives that would achieve similar results more discreetly. I photographed everything with my phone and carefully replaced the documents exactly as I'd found them. My heart was pounding as I slipped out of the office. This was the smoking gun we needed, but it had been an enormous risk. If Vivian had returned early or had security cameras in the house, the consequences could have been disastrous. That evening I shared my findings with Rebecca. She stared at the photos on my phone in silence, tears streaming down her face. All these years, she whispered. All the family dinners, the holidays, the advice she gave me. Was any of it real? Did she ever actually care about me? Or was I just another asset to control? I wrapped my arms around her, wishing I could shield her from this pain. I think your mother loves you in her way, I said carefully, but her definition of love is wrapped up in control and manipulation. That doesn't make the good memories less real. It just means she's deeply flawed. Rebecca nodded against my shoulder. What do we do now? Go to the police? It was a legitimate question. The evidence we'd gathered suggested multiple serious crimes: financial fraud, identity theft, elder abuse. But pursuing criminal charges would devastate the Richardson family beyond repair and potentially ruin Howard's final years. I think we need to talk to your father first, I suggested. Privately, away from Vivian's influence, he deserves to know the truth and have a say in how we proceed. Arranging such a meeting proved challenging. Vivian rarely left Howard alone, particularly since his questions about their finances had become more persistent. Eventually, we created a pretext, a financial planning seminar at my firm that Rebecca suggested Howard might enjoy. Vivian, uninterested in such matters and still convinced her manipulations were working, encouraged him to attend with Rebecca while she had lunch with friends. We met at a quiet coffee shop instead of my office, choosing a corner table where we wouldn't be overheard. Howard looked older than his 70 years, the strain of unspoken worries etching new lines around his eyes. "This isn't really about a seminar, is it?" he asked directly as soon as we sat down. "No," Rebecca admitted. "Dad, we need to talk to you about something important, about Mom, Michael, and the family finances." Howard's shoulders slumped slightly. "I've suspected for a while now. Things don't add up. Accounts I can't access, statements that never arrive at the house. But every time I question Vivian, she has an explanation that makes me feel like I'm losing my mind." "You're not losing your mind," I said firmly. "You're being deliberately misled." Over the next hour, we carefully shared our evidence with Howard, the public record showing the mortgages and liens, the financial flowcharts Derek had created, the security footage of Michael and Vivian in our home office, and finally, the photographs of the documents from Vivian's desk. Howard studied each piece of evidence in silence, his expression growing increasingly grave. When he saw the forged withdrawal authorizations with his signature, his hand trembled. "I never signed these," he said quietly. "Never." "We know," Rebecca said, covering his hand with hers. "Dad, Mom, and Michael have been taking your money to cover Michael's gambling debts. And now they're trying to frame Nathan because they need access to my trust fund." Howard closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the painful truth. When he opened them again, they held a clarity and determination I hadn't seen before. "I've been a fool," he said simply. "I trusted her completely, never questioned, never checked, just signed whatever she put in front of me." He looked between us. "What happens now?" "That's partly up to you," I said. "We have several options, ranging from a private family intervention to legal action. But any path forward starts with protecting you and your remaining assets." Howard nodded decisively. "I want to stop this before more damage is done, not just to our finances, but to our family, to Rebecca's future, to your marriage." He paused. "But I don't want to see Vivian or Michael in jail if we can avoid it. Despite everything, they're still my family." His compassion in the face of such betrayal was both touching and concerning. It showed why he had been vulnerable to Vivian's manipulation for so long. His fundamental decency made it difficult for him to believe others could act with such calculated deception. "We need a strategic approach," I suggested. "First, financial. Protection, changing account access, securing your pension, documenting the theft. Second, family intervention, confronting Vivian and Michael with evidence in a controlled setting. Third, rehabilitation, professional help for Michael's gambling addiction and financial counseling for everyone." Rebecca squeezed her father's. "And, Dad, this won't be easy. Mom will fight back. She'll deny everything, try to turn this around on us. Are you prepared for that?" Howard straightened in his seat, a glimpse of the confident engineer he had once been, emerging through the fog of manipulation. "I've spent years letting Vivian make me doubt myself. That ends today." As we finished our coffee and prepared to leave, Howard regarded me thoughtfully. Nathan, I owe you an apology. I let Vivian shape my perception of you from the beginning, accepted her judgment rather than forming my own. That was a failure on my part. You don't need to apologize, I insisted. Vivian is exceptionally skilled at controlling narratives. I'm just grateful we're working together now. Howard shook his head. No, I do need to apologize. A better man, a better father would have seen through the deception, would have protected his daughter and welcomed her husband properly. He extended his hand across the table. I hope it's not too late to start. As I shook his hand, I felt the first real connection with Howard since meeting him 8 years earlier. It was bittersweet that it took such a crisis to break through the barriers Vivian had carefully constructed between us. The three of us left the coffee shop with a solid plan and renewed determination. We would gather the remaining evidence. We needed secure Howard's financial accounts and prepare for the confrontation that would either heal our family or break it apart permanently. What none of us realized was that Vivian had been one step ahead all along. When Howard returned home that evening, she was waiting for him, with the family attorney and papers for him to sign that would declare him mentally incompetent to manage his own affairs. The confrontation and revelation. Howard called Rebecca. At 9:47 p.m., his voice steady but tense. I need you both to come over. Now! We arrived at the Richardson home 20 minutes later to find Howard sitting in his study with Vivian and their family attorney, Martin Adler. A half-signed document lay on the desk between them. Perfect timing, Vivian said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Rebecca, your father needs your support right now. He's been struggling with cognitive issues, and we're putting safeguards in place. The document was titled Declaration of Mental Incapacity and Appointment of Financial Guardian. Vivian's name was listed as the primary guardian, with Michael as the secondary. Dad? Rebecca moved to Howard's side. What's going on? Your mother thinks I'm losing my mental capacity, Howard said, his voice remarkably calm. She's arranged for me to be declared incompetent so she can control all our finances. Vivian placed a hand on Howard's shoulder. It's for your protection, dear. You've been so confused lately. Missing appointments, forgetting conversations. The doctor is concerned. What doctor? I asked. Dr. Merritt evaluated Howard last week, Vivian replied smoothly. He recommended these measures immediately. Howard looked directly at Martin Adler. Martin, could you please excuse us for a family discussion? I'll call you tomorrow about the paperwork. The attorney glanced between Howard and Vivian, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. Of course, take your time. These decisions shouldn't be rushed. He gathered his briefcase and let himself out. As soon as the front door closed, the facade dropped. Vivian's nurturing expression hardened into something cold and calculating. What have you been telling them, Howard? The truth, he replied simply. About the money you've taken, the accounts you've drained, the forgeries. Her face paled slightly before she recovered. You're proving my point about your confusion. I've managed our finances for decades, with your full knowledge and consent. Not my consent to steal from me, Howard countered. Not my consent to forge my signature. Not my consent to funnel hundreds of thousands of dollars to cover Michael's gambling debts. The direct accusation hung in the air. Vivian's eyes narrowed as she calculated her next move. This is Nathan's influence, she said finally. He's trying to drive a wedge between us, turn you against me so he can control Rebecca's inheritance. Mom, stop. Rebecca interjected. We have evidence, actual evidence, not the fabricated kind you created against Nathan. Public records showing the mortgages you took out without Dad's knowledge, bank transfers, the forged withdrawal authorizations. Vivian's composure slipped fractionally. You've been spying on me? Going through my private papers? The same. Where you broke into our house and went through our files, I countered. The security footage shows you and Michael quite clearly. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Vivian's face. Her gaze darted to the corners of the room as if checking for cameras. What security footage? From our home security system, Rebecca explained. We have video of you and Michael accessing Nathan's computer, photographing our financial documents, and returning days later with someone else. That's absurd, Vivian scoffed, but her voice lacked conviction. We would never. We have the footage, Vivian, Howard interrupted, and the backup logs from Nathan's cloud storage showing exactly what files were created and modified. We have everything. A tense silence filled the room as Vivian processed this information, recalculating her options. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost wounded. Howard, after 40 years together, how can you believe I would steal from you? Everything I've done has been for this family. It was the perfect pivot, from denial to emotional manipulation. I'd seen her use this tactic before, and it had always been effective with Howard, but something had changed in him. The fog of manipulation had lifted. I've spent years trusting you blindly, he said quietly, signing papers without reading, and them accepting your explanations without question. That ends tonight. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small digital voice recorder. I recorded our conversation earlier when you were pressuring me to sign these guardianship papers. You said, and I quote, "Once you sign this, I'll have full legal control over all our assets. No more questions about the withdrawals or Michael's business investments." Vivian's face drained of color. You recorded me without my knowledge? That's illegal. Oregon is a one-party consent state, I provided. The recording is perfectly legal. Howard placed the recorder on the desk beside the guardianship papers. I'm not signing these documents, Vivian. In fact, I've already taken steps to protect what's left of our finances. I opened a new account this afternoon in only my name and transferred my pension deposits there. Vivian's shock was palpable. You had no right. I had every right, Howard cut in. It's my pension, my retirement. He stood up, suddenly looking taller than his medium frame. I've also scheduled appointments with a forensic accountant and our bank to review every transaction from our joint accounts for the past 5 years. Every withdrawal, every transfer. This is ridiculous, Vivian sputtered. You're overreacting to normal financial management. Is forging my signature on withdrawal forms normal financial management? Howard asked calmly. The direct question hung in the air. Vivian opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Michael entered the study, stopping short when he saw us all gathered there. What's going on? Mom? Dad? Perfect timing, Howard said, echoing Vivian's earlier greeting. We were just discussing the family finances, specifically the money. That's been going to cover your gambling debts. Michael froze, his eyes darting to his mother. I don't know what you're talking about. We know about the Tacoma casino judgment, Michael, Rebecca said quietly. The court records are public. And we have your mother's records of payments to various casinos with your name on them, I added. Vivian rose from her chair, suddenly switching to damage control mode. This is all a misunderstanding. Yes, Michael had some gambling issues in the past, but they're resolved. The financial arrangements were temporary loans, all above board. Above board? Howard repeated incredulously. You forged my signature to drain my retirement accounts. I had your power of attorney, Vivian countered, for medical decisions, not financial ones, Howard corrected. And certainly not for taking out multiple mortgages on properties I co-own without my knowledge. Michael looked increasingly uncomfortable. Dad, listen, there were some business cash flow issues. Mom was helping temporarily. It's being paid back. $700,000, Michael, Howard said flatly. That's what's missing from my retirement accounts. Another $400,000 in home equity, plus whatever your mother took from her inheritance. Is your clothing boutique really losing over $1 million, or is the money going elsewhere? The directness of the question left no room for evasion. Michael's shoulders slumped. It started small, he admitted. Just a few thousand here and there on the poker tables. I was good, winning more than losing. Then I started playing higher stakes, trying to recover some business losses. It escalated. And you kept borrowing from your mother to cover the losses, Rebecca finished for him. She offered, Michael protested. I never asked her to take money from Dad's accounts. That was her decision. Vivian's head snapped toward her son. Don't you dare put this on me. I was trying to save you, to protect the family name. What was I supposed to do? Let you be sued by every casino in the Northwest? Let your business fail publicly? The fracturing of their united front was revealing. Mother and son, once aligned in deception, were now turning on each other as the pressure mounted. What about framing Nathan? Rebecca asked, her voice hard. Whose idea was that? The fake gambling evidence, the manipulated financial statements, the lies about his character? Michael at least had the decency to look ashamed. That was a mistake. A mistake? I echoed. You broke into our home. You accessed my computer without permission. You created fraudulent documents to make it look like I was gambling and mismanaging money. We needed access to Rebecca's trust fund, Vivian said matter-of-factly, shocking us all with her sudden candor. If you two divorced, she'd come home. Be more open to helping the family financially. The cold calculation in her voice sent a chill through the room. She wasn't even trying to deny it anymore. So you tried to destroy my marriage? Rebecca's voice trembled with anger and hurt. To get to my inheritance? Don't be so dramatic, Vivian snapped. Marriages end all the time. You would have moved on, found someone more suitable, someone who understands family loyalty. Someone you could manipulate, you mean? Howard interjected. Like you've manipulated me for years. The raw truth of the situation hung in the air. This wasn't just about money. It was about control, about Vivian's pathological need to manage every aspect of her family's lives, including who they loved and how they lived. What happens now? Michael asked quietly, the fight gone from his voice. Howard looked at each of us before answering. That depends on several things. First, complete transparency about where the money went and what's left. Second, professional. Help for Michael's gambling addiction. Real help, not your mother's enablement. Third, a reckoning with the damage you've both done to this family. And if we refuse, Vivian challenged, though her voice lacked its usual authority, then we pursue legal action, I said simply. The evidence we've gathered indicates multiple felonies: fraud, forgery, financial elder abuse, breaking and entering attempted defamation. The choice is yours. Michael paled visibly. Dad, you wouldn't send us to jail. Howard's expression was pained but resolved. I don't want to, son, but I can't protect you from the consequences of your actions. Anymore, neither can your mother, despite what she's led you to believe. We need time to think, Vivian said, her mind visibly working on a new angle, a new manipulation. You have until tomorrow morning, Howard replied firmly. By noon, I expect a full accounting of all financial transactions for the past 5 years. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every loan. And Michael, you'll call that gambling addiction hotline and make an appointment with a therapist who specializes in gambling disorders. And if we comply, Michael asked, then we handle this as a family matter, Howard said. We find a way forward that protects what's left of our finances and begins to rebuild the trust you've broken. But understand this, there will be no access to Rebecca's trust fund, no more deception, no more manipulation. Vivian remained silent, her expression unreadable. I realized she was assessing her options, calculating which course would allow her to maintain the most control in a rapidly deteriorating situation. "One more thing," Howard added, turning to me. "Nathan, I want you to recommend a financial advisor, someone you trust who isn't connected to your firm. I need objective help sorting through this mess." "Of course," I agreed immediately. "I know several excellent advisors who specialize in situations like this." Rebecca stepped closer to her father, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Are you sure you want to stay here tonight? You could come home with us." Howard shook his head. "This is still my home, and running away won't solve anything." He glanced at Vivian. "Besides, I've already moved the important documents to a secure location. There's nothing left to hide or destroy." As we prepared to leave, Vivian made one last attempt. "Rebecca, darling, please try to understand. Everything I've done has been to protect this family. Your father is overreacting to normal financial management." "Stop it, Mom," Rebecca said firmly. "Just stop. We have the evidence. We know what you did. What you tried to do to my marriage. There's no spinning this into something noble." Michael remained silent, seemingly deflated by the unraveling of the carefully constructed facade he and his mother had maintained. Outside, as Rebecca and I walked to our car, she suddenly stopped, leaning against the vehicle for support. "Do you think they'll actually come clean tomorrow? Provide the financial records?" I considered the question carefully. Vivian won't. She's too committed to control. She'll find another angle, another manipulation. Michael might, though. He seemed genuinely shaken. "I'm worried about Dad," Rebecca admitted, "being alone with them tonight." "Your father has surprised me," I said honestly. "He's stronger than I gave him credit for, and than Vivian gave him credit for. That's why she was trying to have him declared incompetent. She recognized he was breaking free from her control." Rebecca nodded slowly. "All these years I thought Dad was just passive, happy to let Mom make the decisions, but he was being systematically undermined, made to doubt himself." She looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "How do you recover from that kind of betrayal? 40 years of marriage? And it was built on manipulation and lies." "One day at a time," I suggested, taking her hand, "with support from people who genuinely care about him, people who respect his autonomy and his intelligence." We drove home in contemplative silence, both processing the confrontation and preparing for what would come next. Whatever happened with Vivian and Michael, one thing was certain. The Richardson family would never be the same. Morning brought unexpected developments. At 7:15 a.m., Stephanie called in a panic. "Michael's gone. He packed a bag and left around midnight. He wouldn't tell me where he was going, just said he needed to sort things out before meeting with Howard." By 8:30, Howard called with more news. "Vivian's gone too. Left a note saying she's staying with her sister in Seattle until I come to my senses. She took her jewelry and personal items." The coordinated departures weren't entirely surprising. Both faced uncomfortable truths and potential legal consequences if they returned with incomplete or fabricated financial records. Running was easier than accountability. "What do you want to do?" I asked Howard when he arrived at our house later that morning, looking exhausted, but somehow unburdened. "I've been thinking about that all night," he replied, accepting the coffee Rebecca offered. "Part of me wants to report everything to the police immediately. Another part hopes they'll come to their senses and return voluntarily." "Do you think that's likely?" Rebecca asked gently. Howard sighed. "No, Vivian has never admitted wrongdoing in 40 years of marriage. Michael follows her lead in everything. They're buying time, probably moving assets, covering tracks." "Then perhaps we should act quickly to protect what's left," I suggested. Howard nodded decisively. "I've already called the banks to freeze our joint accounts. I've contacted a lawyer who specializes in elder financial abuse cases, and I've..." scheduled a meeting with a forensic accountant for tomorrow morning. He looked up at us with clear eyes. I spent years letting others make decisions for me. That ends now. His determination was inspiring. Despite the betrayal and loss, Howard was reclaiming his agency, his voice. He wasn't broken by Vivian's deception. He was galvanized by it. Over the next week, we pieced together more details of Vivian and Michael's financial schemes. The forensic accountant uncovered offshore accounts, undisclosed credit cards, and a pattern of increasingly desperate financial maneuvers. All told, they had diverted nearly $4 million over 5 years, most of it ultimately lost to Michael's gambling or used to keep his failing business afloat. The business was never profitable, the accountant explained, reviewing spreadsheets with us. It was essentially a front for moving money from Howard's accounts to cover gambling debts. Howard absorbed this information with remarkable composure. At least now I know. No more secrets, no more lies. Neither Vivian nor Michael returned for the reckoning Howard had demanded. Instead, Vivian hired an aggressive divorce attorney, who claimed Howard was the one who had mismanaged their finances, leading to the current crisis. It was a bold strategy, trying to rewrite reality through legal filings, but entirely in character for someone who had spent decades constructing alternative narratives. Michael was more direct. He called Rebecca 2 weeks after disappearing, sounding contrite and defeated. "I'm in a treatment center in Arizona," he admitted. 30-day residential program for gambling addiction. Mom's furious that I'm abandoning her, but I couldn't keep living the lie. "Are you going to come clean about everything?" Rebecca asked. "The financial fraud, the attempt to frame Nathan." "Yes," he said after a pause. "I've written a full statement for Dad's lawyer. Everything I know about the accounts, the withdrawals, the forged documents. Mom's going to disown me when she finds out, but I can't keep carrying this." It was the first genuine step toward accountability from either of them, a small but significant break in the unified front of deception they had maintained for years. As winter settled over Portland, our focus shifted from the crisis to rebuilding. Howard found a modest apartment near our home, begun volunteering with a woodworking program for at-risk youth, and gradually reclaimed his independence. The divorce proceedings continued, with Vivian fighting for assets that had long since vanished into Michael's gambling debts. "I never thought I'd start over at 70, Howard remarked one evening as we sat on our porch, watching raindrops illuminate in the streetlights. "But there's something freeing about it, building a life on my own terms." "It's never too late to reclaim your story," I offered, "to live authentically." He nodded thoughtfully. "I spent decades doubting myself, my memory, my judgment. Vivian had a way of making me question reality itself. Small things at first. Did I really agree to that dinner party? Did I actually say I liked that vacation spot? Then bigger things, financial decisions, property purchases, investments. Gaslighting, Rebecca supplied the term. Making you doubt your own perceptions." "Exactly," Howard agreed, "and the longer it went on, the more I surrendered my autonomy. It was easier to just go along, to assume she was right and I was mistaken." He smiled sadly. "The human mind adapts to survive. Mine adapted to constant manipulation by simply accepting it as normal." His insight was profound. Breaking free from decades of psychological manipulation wasn't just about discovering financial fraud. It was about reclaiming his ability to trust his own perceptions, to believe in his own competence. "The most valuable thing I've learned through all this," Howard continued, "is that courage isn't about fearlessness. It's about facing your fears and acting anyway. I was terrified to confront Vivian, to admit how much control I'd surrendered, to acknowledge the signs I'd ignored for years. But facing that fear was the only path to freedom." As he spoke, I realized Howard wasn't just rebuilding his life. He was rediscovering his voice, his wisdom, his inherent worth as a person, separate from his roles as husband and father. The tragedy of Vivian's betrayal had paradoxically created space for a kind of rebirth. In the months that followed, our family dynamics continued to evolve. Michael completed his treatment program and returned to Portland, humbled and committed to making amends. He sold the failing boutique, took a job managing a legitimate retail store, and attended Gamblers Anonymous meetings 3 times weekly. His relationship with Rebecca was damaged, but not destroyed. Tentative steps toward reconciliation began with honest conversations and simple family dinners. Vivian remained defiantly unrepentant, even when presented with irrefutable evidence. In divorce proceedings, she maintained her actions had been justified by family necessity. She eventually settled with Howard for far less than she'd demanded, her negotiating position weakened by Michael's sworn statement detailing their financial schemes. Through it all, Rebecca and I strengthened our partnership. Our trust deepened. By weathering the storm together, we had faced Vivian's attempt to destroy our marriage and emerged more united, more committed to protecting the life we'd built. One evening, as spring brought cherry blossoms to our neighborhood, Rebecca found me in my home office reviewing client portfolios. "I've been thinking about something Dad said," she began, perching on the edge of my desk, "about how the human mind adapts to survive, even in toxic situations, how we normalize the abnormal until we can't see it clearly anymore." I set aside my work, giving her my full attention. "What about it?" "I think I did that too," she admitted. "I normalized Mom's controlling behavior, her manipulation, her subtle undermining of you from the beginning. I made excuses. That's just how she is, or she means well, instead of seeing it clearly." "You loved your mother," I said gently. "You wanted to believe the best about her." "Yes, but in doing so, I enabled her. I became part of the system that allowed her behavior to continue unchecked." She reached for my hand. "I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you more strongly from the beginning." "You have nothing to apologize for," I assured her. "Vivian spent decades perfecting her techniques. She knew exactly how to play on your loyalty, your desire for family harmony." Rebecca nodded slowly. "The strangest part is that I still love her despite everything. I'm angry and hurt and disappointed, but she's still my mother." "That's not strange at all," I countered. "Love isn't a faucet we can turn off, even when people hurt us deeply. It's possible to love someone and still hold them accountable for their actions, to establish boundaries while maintaining compassion." A small smile touched her lips. "When did you get so wise?" "I've had excellent teachers," I replied, returning her smile, "including a father-in-law who showed me that it's never too late to reclaim your voice, your truth, your power." As night fell over Portland, we sat together on our porch swing, the future before us uncertain, but unquestionably our own. We had weathered Vivian's manipulation, her attempt to tear us apart for financial gain. But more importantly, we had refused to become cynical or bitter in the process. We remained open to reconciliation where possible, firm in our boundaries where necessary, and committed to building a family culture based on honesty rather than deception, support rather than control. In the end, the security cameras that captured Vivian and Michael's intrusion into our home had revealed much more than a simple break-in. They had exposed a pattern of manipulation and control that had shaped the Richardson family for decades. And in doing so, they had created an opportunity for healing, for rebuilding on a foundation of truth rather than comfortable lies. Howard's journey from manipulation victim to self-advocate showed that liberation from toxic relationships is possible at any age. Michael's path from addiction and enablement to accountability demonstrated that change is possible when we face our demons. Honestly, And our own experience proved that standing firm in your truth, even when others try to distort it, is ultimately the only path to authentic connection. The greatest victory wasn't exposing Vivian's schemes or protecting Rebecca's inheritance. It was breaking the cycle of manipulation that had entrapped 3 generations of Richardsons and ensuring that legacy of control would end with us. 1 year passed since that fateful Thanksgiving that had unraveled decades of manipulation and deceit. The seasons had cycled through winter's introspection to spring's renewal, summer's growth, and now autumn's harvest. We gathered once again for Thanksgiving, but everything had changed. Instead of Vivian's imposing colonial house, we assembled in Howard's welcoming apartment. The space wasn't large, but with its walls lined with his handcrafted bookshelves, and the smell of his surprisingly excellent cooking filling every corner, it felt more like home than the Richardson mansion ever had. "I never knew you could cook, Dad," Rebecca marveled, as Howard expertly carved a perfectly roasted turkey. "Neither did I," he admitted with a chuckle. "Vivian always insisted on doing everything in the kitchen, said I'd make a mess." His eyes twinkled. "Turns out I'm rather good at it. Been taking classes at the community center." Around the table sat our reconstructed family: Howard, Rebecca and me, Michael and his new girlfriend Claire, a counselor he'd met during recovery, Stephanie with the twins, and Eleanor with her husband. A smaller gathering than Vivian's elaborate productions, but infinitely warmer. The past year had brought profound changes for everyone. Howard's divorce had finalized 6 months earlier, with a settlement that acknowledged the financial devastation Vivian had wrought, but still provided her with enough to live comfortably. "I don't want vengeance," Howard had explained. "I want freedom for all of us." That freedom had transformed him. At 71, Howard had discovered passions and talents long suppressed by Vivian's controlling influence. He joined a hiking club, started teaching woodworking to veterans with PTSD, and even begun dating a widow from his building, much to Rebecca's initial surprise and eventual delight. "To new beginnings," Howard proposed as we raised our glasses, "and to hard-earned wisdom." We clinked glasses, the simple ritual carrying deeper meaning than all of Vivian's elaborate Thanksgiving traditions combined. As we enjoyed Howard's surprisingly delicious meal, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The road to healing hadn't been smooth or linear. There had been setbacks, painful revelations, and moments when reconciliation seemed impossible. But there had also been breakthrough moments of connection, understanding, and growth that none of us could have anticipated. Michael, perhaps, had traveled the furthest. After completing his treatment program, he had faced the daunting task of rebuilding his life without the safety net of his mother's financial manipulations. He'd sold his failing boutique, taken a retail management position with a national chain, and committed to weekly therapy and Gamblers Anonymous meetings. 6 months clean today, he announced proudly during dinner, showing us his recovery chip. "1 day at a time, but it gets easier." Claire squeezed his hand supportively. They'd met during an outpatient therapy group after his initial treatment, their relationship growing slowly from friendship to romance as Michael worked through his recovery. "The hardest part wasn't giving up gambling," Michael admitted. "It was giving up the fantasy that one big win would solve everything. Accepting that the only path forward was through hard work, accountability, and living within my means." I nodded, impressed by his insight. "That's true for most of life's challenges. The quick fix is usually an illusion." Mum never understood. "That," Michael said, a shadow passing over his face. "She always believed in the perfect solution, the right connection, the right marriage alliance, the right investment, anything to maintain the appearance of success. Vivian remained the one missing piece in our reconstructed family puzzle. After the divorce, She had moved to Arizona, maintaining contact only with a few old friends from Portland. She sent Rebecca occasional emails, superficial updates about the weather, her garden, social events, never acknowledging the past or expressing remorse for her actions. "Have you thought more about visiting her?" I asked Rebecca later that evening as we helped Howard with the dishes. Rebecca handed me a plate to dry. "I have. I think I'm ready, actually. Not for reconciliation necessarily, but for closure. To say what needs to be said, and then decide what kind of relationship is possible going forward." Howard paused, his scrubbing of a stubborn pot. "Are you sure that's wise? Vivian hasn't changed, Rebecca. She still believes she was justified in everything she did." "I know," Rebecca acknowledged. "I'm not expecting an apology or a magical transformation. I just need to speak my truth directly to her. For me, not for her." Howard nodded slowly. "Then I support you. Just protect yourself. Vivian has a lifetime of experience turning conversations to her advantage." "I've learned from the best," Rebecca replied with a small smile. "Both how to manipulate and how to resist manipulation. I know what I'm walking into." 2 weeks later, Rebecca flew to Scottsdale alone. We had discussed whether I should accompany her, but ultimately decided this was a journey she needed to undertake independently. "I started making excuses for my mother's behavior the day you and I met," Rebecca explained. "This is my responsibility to address." The morning of her meeting with Vivian, we video-called briefly. Rebecca looked calm but determined, sitting in her hotel room with the desert sun streaming through the window. "Remember, you're not responsible for her reactions or her emotions," I reminded her. "You're only responsible for speaking your truth with integrity." "I know," she nodded. "I've spent my whole life anticipating her needs, adjusting my behavior to prevent her disappointment or displeasure. Not today. Today, I speak for myself." Vivian had chosen an upscale restaurant for their meeting. Neutral territory with the protection of public expectations for civilized behavior. Rebecca texted me when she arrived and again when she left 3 hours later, but the details of their conversation would wait until she returned home. When her flight landed the next evening, I could see the change in her immediately. There was a lightness to her movements, a clarity in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Whatever had transpired with Vivian, Rebecca had found the resolution she needed. "How did it go?" I asked as we drove home from the airport. "Not as I expected," she admitted, "but exactly as I needed." She turned to watch the familiar Portland streets glide past, gathering her thoughts. I had prepared this whole speech, all the things I needed her to understand about the damage she'd caused. But when I sat across from her, looking perfectly poised and controlled as always, I realized something important. What was that? That I wasn't there to change her mind or make her understand. I was there to free myself from needing her. Understanding. Rebecca's voice grew stronger as she continued. So instead of delivering my prepared speech, I simply told her that I knew the full truth about what she'd done. To Dad, to Michael, to us. That I understood she may never acknowledge it or apologize for it, and that I was at peace with that. How did she respond? At first, with denial, then with justification, how everything she did was for the family, for our protection and security. Rebecca shook her head, the same manipulative narrative she's always used, but for the first time I didn't engage with it. I didn't argue or try to convince her. I just listened, acknowledged I'd heard her perspective, and then stated my own truth again. I reached across to take her hand. That must have been incredibly difficult. Strangely, it wasn't. Once I stopped needing her to validate my reality, the conversation became almost simple. I told her I was open to having a relationship moving forward, but only one based on honesty and respect for boundaries, that she was welcome in our lives, but not in our finances, not in our decision-making, not in our marriage. And? Rebecca smiled sadly. She said she'd think about it. That was probably the most honest thing she said to me in years. As we pulled into our driveway, Rebecca turned to face me fully. I realized something important during that conversation, Nathan. Something I've been trying to understand for months now. What's that? Forgiveness isn't about excusing what someone did or pretending it didn't happen. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of resentment and bitterness. I don't excuse what my mother did. I never will. But I'm choosing not to let it define me or my future. Her wisdom struck me deeply. In the aftermath of Vivian's manipulation, we had all been focused on justice, on accountability, on protecting ourselves from further harm. Those were necessary first steps. But Rebecca had moved beyond protection to something more profound, personal liberation. The weeks following Rebecca's confrontation with Vivian brought unexpected developments. Howard completed a certification, a program in woodworking instruction, and launched a small business creating custom furniture. Michael and Claire announced their engagement, planning a simple ceremony that emphasized commitment and honesty over elaborate displays. And Rebecca discovered she was pregnant with our first child. Life finds a way to renew itself, Howard remarked when we shared the news over dinner at his apartment, even after the harshest winters. The pregnancy seemed to represent everything we had fought for. A future free from manipulation, a new generation that would inherit our hard-won wisdom rather than Vivian's patterns of control. We were determined to create a family culture built on authenticity, respect for boundaries, and the courage to speak difficult truths with compassion. Most surprisingly, Vivian reached out to Rebecca shortly after learning about the pregnancy. The email was brief but significant. Rebecca, I've been reflecting on our conversation. While I don't agree with everything you said, I recognize that I've damaged our relationship in ways I never intended. I would like to know my grandchild if you're willing. On your terms. Mom. It wasn't an apology or an admission of wrongdoing, but it was an acknowledgement of Rebecca's boundaries, perhaps the first real respect Vivian had shown for her daughter's autonomy in decades. What do you think? Rebecca asked, showing me the message. I think it's a small step, I replied cautiously, but only you can decide if it's enough to begin rebuilding trust. Rebecca considered this thoughtfully. Maybe not trust yet, but perhaps opportunity for something different than what came before. We agreed to proceed with caution. Vivian would be welcome to visit after the baby was born, with clear boundaries established in advance. No unsupervised time with our child, no financial gifts or entanglements, no undermining our parenting decisions, simple rules that any respectful grandparent would naturally follow, but that needed explicit statement given the history. To our mild surprise, Vivian accepted these terms without protest. I just want to be part of the family again, she wrote, however that looks now. As Rebecca's pregnancy progressed, we renovated our home office into a nursery. Howard crafted a beautiful cherrywood crib as a gift, pouring his love and newfound artistry into every detail. Michael and Claire helped paint the room a peaceful sage green. Even Stephanie brought the twins over to create handprint art for the walls. Our home became a gathering place for this evolving family, bound not by obligation, but by choice and genuine care. During this period of anticipation and preparation, I noticed something remarkable happening with Howard. The man who had once been diminished by decades of gaslighting and control was emerging as the true patriarch of our reconstructed family, not through authority or manipulation, but through wisdom, generosity, and quiet strength. I've been thinking about legacy, he shared one evening as we worked together in his woodshop, preparing shelves for the nursery. Not money or property, but what we pass down that actually matters. I ran my hand along the smooth edge of a board he'd just shaped. "What do you think that is?" "Courage," he replied without hesitation. "The courage to see truth even when it's painful. The courage to speak that truth even when others deny it. The courage to set boundaries even when it risks rejection." He blew sawdust from a freshly drilled hole. And most importantly, the courage to begin again, no matter how late in life. His words resonated deeply. Each of us had been forced to find different kinds of courage throughout this ordeal. Rebecca's courage to confront the mother she both loved and feared. Michael's courage to face his addiction and complicity. My courage to stand firm when my character was under attack, and Howard's courage to reclaim his autonomy after decades of surrender. "I wish I'd found that courage earlier," Howard continued, a hint of regret coloring his voice. "I might have spared all of you so much pain. But then we might not have learned these lessons so thoroughly," I countered. "Sometimes the most valuable wisdom comes from our most painful experiences." He nodded thoughtfully. "True. But I want better for your child. I want them to grow up understanding healthy boundaries from the beginning, recognizing manipulation instead of normalizing it." "They will," I assured him, "because they'll have you as an example, not just of how manipulation works, but of how it can be overcome at any stage of life." The birth of Emma Rose Cooper in early spring brought a new dimension to our healing journey. Holding my daughter for the first time, I felt an overwhelming commitment to protect her not just from physical harm, but from the psychological manipulation that had nearly destroyed her mother's family. "She has your eyes," Rebecca whispered as we marveled at Emma's tiny features, "and I think she has my father's gentle spirit." "Poor kid," I joked softly, "stuck with the best parts of all of us." The first months of Emma's life created a new rhythm for our family. Howard visited almost daily, his face lighting up whenever Emma recognized him and reached out her tiny hands. Michael and Claire brought thoughtful gifts and offered to babysit for date nights. Even Eleanor and her husband became regular fixtures in our home, delighting in their great-niece's development. Vivian's introduction to her granddaughter came when Emma was 3 months old. She flew to Portland for a weekend visit, staying at a hotel rather than imposing on anyone's home, a small but significant acknowledgement of new boundaries. The moment Vivian held Emma for the first time revealed a vulnerability I'd never witnessed in my mother-in-law. Her carefully maintained composure cracked as tears filled her eyes. "She's perfect," she whispered, gently touching Emma's cheek. Rebecca watched the interaction with complex emotions playing across her face: wariness, hope, lingering hurt, and tentative connection. "Would you like to feed her?" she offered, extending a prepared bottle. "I'd love that," Vivian replied. Her usual commanding tone softened to something almost humble. Later, when Vivian had returned to her hotel and Emma was asleep, Rebecca and I sat on our back porch, reflecting on the day. "Do you think she's really changed?" I asked. Rebecca considered the question carefully. "I think she's trying in her way. But change at 70, after a lifetime of control, doesn't happen overnight. What matters is that we've changed. We see clearly now. We know how to protect ourselves and Emma while still allowing for the possibility of a healthier relationship. Boundaries with compassion," I summarized. "Exactly." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "I used to think family meant unconditional acceptance of behavior, no matter how toxic. Now I understand that true family means caring enough to hold each other accountable, to expect growth, to require respect." As Emma grew from infant to toddler, our family continued its parallel growth and healing. Howard expanded his woodworking business into therapeutic programs for veterans and at-risk youth. Michael celebrated 2 years of sobriety and opened a legitimate children's clothing consignment shop with Claire. Stephanie discovered a talent for design and launched an online boutique featuring her handmade items. And Vivian, perhaps most surprisingly, began therapy at 71. "I want to understand," she told Rebecca during one visit, "not to excuse what I did, but to make sure I don't repeat those patterns with Emma." It wasn't a dramatic transformation. Vivian still struggled with control, still occasionally tested boundaries, still found it nearly impossible to directly apologize for specific actions. But she was making genuine efforts to create a different kind of relationship with her granddaughter than she had with her children, one based on acceptance rather than expectation, appreciation rather than evaluation. On Emma's second birthday, we hosted a small celebration in our backyard. The spring weather cooperated perfectly, sunshine warming the colorful decorations Howard had crafted from reclaimed wood and fabric Stephanie had provided. Emma toddled between adoring family members, accepting cuddles and treats with equal enthusiasm. I found Rebecca standing slightly apart, watching the scene with a serene smile. "Happy?" I asked, slipping my arm around her waist. "Deeply," she confirmed. "Not because everything is perfect or all wounds are healed, but because we're all moving forward authentically." She nodded toward one corner of the yard, where Howard was showing Emma how to use a toy hammer, while Vivian looked on without interfering. 2 years ago, I couldn't have imagined this scene. I followed her gaze, understanding exactly what she meant. The tableau represented not just family reconciliation, but a fundamental shift in dynamics. Howard exercising his natural gifts without minimization, Vivian participating without controlling, Emma experiencing the security of healthy boundaries and genuine connection. "We did this," I said softly, "all of us in different ways. We broke a multi-generational pattern of manipulation and control." "It started with those security cameras," Rebecca mused. "Such a small thing, just basic home protection. We never imagined they'd capture so much more than a break-in." "They captured truth," I replied. "And truth, however painful initially, is always the path to authentic connection and growth." As the party continued around us, I reflected on the journey from that devastating Thanksgiving to this joyful celebration. The security footage had indeed revealed much more than Vivian and Michael's physical intrusion into our home. It had exposed a pattern of psychological intrusion that had shaped the Richardson family for generations. The subtle manipulation, the gaslighting, the erosion of boundaries and autonomy. But more importantly, that revelation had created space for something new to emerge. Not perfect harmony or easy forgiveness, but honest reckoning and genuine growth. Each family member had been forced to confront difficult truths about themselves, about their relationships, about the difference between authentic connection and manipulative control. Howard had discovered his voice and personal agency after decades of suppression. Michael had faced his addiction and the enabling dynamics that sustained it. Rebecca had learned to distinguish between familial love and toxic loyalty. And I had found a deeper appreciation for the family we were intentionally building, free from the manipulative patterns of the past. Even Vivian, in her limited way, was attempting to evolve, not into a completely different person, but into a more self-aware version of herself, one capable of occasionally placing others' needs above her desire for control. As Emma ran to us with a flower clutched in her chubby hand, her face alight with discovery and joy, I felt profound gratitude for the difficult journey that had led us here. The security cameras had captured Vivian's deception, but they had revealed something far more valuable: the possibility of liberation from toxic patterns, the potential for renewal even after profound betrayal, and the power of truth to heal what secrets had broken. "Flower for Mama and Dada," Emma announced proudly, offering her slightly crushed dandelion. Rebecca knelt to accept the gift with appropriate reverence. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you for sharing it with us." In that simple exchange lay everything we had fought for, the freedom to appreciate what is offered rather than demanding what is desired, the security to give freely without fear of manipulation, the joy of connection without the burden of control. Later that night, after Emma was asleep and the house quiet, Rebecca and I sat on our porch swing beneath a sky scattered with stars. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't installed those security cameras?" she asked. "If we'd never discovered what Mom and Michael were doing?" I considered the question carefully. I think the truth would have found its way out eventually, maybe in a different form, maybe with more damage done before the revelation. But lies and manipulation require constant maintenance. They're exhausting to sustain long-term. "Truth is persistent," Rebecca agreed. "It waits patiently to be acknowledged. And once acknowledged, it creates possibility," I added. "Not just for accountability, but for genuine connection." Rebecca leaned her head against my shoulder, the gentle rhythm of the swing carrying us through comfortable silence. "I'm proud of us," she said finally. "Not just for exposing the manipulation or protecting our marriage, but for how we've handled the aftermath, with firmness but not vengeance, with boundaries but not bitterness. 'The best revenge is living well,'" I quoted softly, "on your own terms, guided by your own values." As we sat together under the vast night sky, I realized that the security camera footage had offered us something beyond evidence or protection. It had provided clarity, the ability to see situations and relationships as they truly were, not as we wished them to be or feared they might be. And that clarity, painful though it initially was, had ultimately been the greatest gift. The manipulations revealed by those cameras had temporarily fractured our family. But the truth they exposed had created space for something stronger to emerge. Relationships based on respect rather than control, connection rather than obligation, and the courage to begin again, however many times it takes. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.